So you're the teacher who got lucky, huh? Must be nice having Mike pay for everything while you play with crayons all day. The words sliced through the elegant atmosphere of the Riverside Country Club's private dining room like a blade through silk. Jessica Collins stood there, champagne flute raised in mock celebration, her perfectly veneered smile masking the venom in her voice as 30 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. The woman who had supposedly trapped their successful friend, Mike, into marriage and was now bleeding him dry with my simple teacher needs. What she didn't know was that the unassuming woman sitting quietly in the corner had been writing the checks that funded not just my own comfortable life, but several business ventures that had kept some of their own lifestyles afloat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Claire Thompson, and at 35, I've learned that people see exactly what they want to see, especially when it comes to measuring someone's worth. As I sat in that opulent dining room, surrounded by Mike's college friends and their perfectly curated lives, I couldn't help but smile at the irony of Jessica's accusation. She stood there in her designer dress, speaking from her position of assumed superiority, completely unaware that the modest elementary school teacher she was attempting to humiliate came from more money than she could dream of. The evening had started innocently enough. Mike's 37th birthday celebration was supposed to be intimate, just close friends gathering to celebrate another year of his life. I had chosen my outfit carefully that morning, a simple navy dress from Target paired with the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me years ago. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention or make anyone uncomfortable. That was always my approach. Blend in, let others shine. Avoid the spotlight that came with revealing too much about my background. Mike had been excited about the party for weeks, talking endlessly about how much it meant to him that his college friends were all coming together. These were the people who had known him since he was 18, who had watched him grow from a confused business major into the successful marketing manager he was today. They were his chosen family, the bonds forged during late-night study sessions and weekend adventures that had survived moves across the country, career changes, marriages, and divorces. I understood the importance of their approval, even if I sometimes questioned whether they truly had Mike's best interests at heart. Jessica Collins, in particular, had made it clear from the moment Mike introduced me 5 years ago that she found me lacking. Where she saw inadequacy, I saw authenticity. Where she saw financial burden, I saw genuine love unencumbered by material concerns. The irony of her perspective had always amused me, though I'd never shared the joke with anyone, not even Mike. The Riverside Country Club represented everything Jessica's crowd valued. Established in 1952, it perched on a hill overlooking the city with manicured grounds that whispered old money and exclusivity. The private dining room Mike had reserved featured floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the 18th. Whole, crystal chandeliers that caught the late-afternoon California sun, and enough understated elegance to make anyone feel either perfectly at home or completely out of place. I fell into the latter category by design, not circumstance. As guests arrived, the familiar dynamics began to play out. Ryan Davis, Jessica's boyfriend and investment banker, offered his practiced handshake and polite inquiries about my teaching. His smile never quite reached his eyes, and I could see him calculating my worth based on my Target dress and lack of designer accessories. Ashley Martinez, Ryan's wife and boutique owner, air-kissed my cheeks while scanning my outfit with the practiced eye of someone who made her living selling expensive clothes to women who needed external validation. David Wilson, the lawyer, nodded politely before immediately engaging Mike in conversation about some client case that excluded me entirely. His girlfriend Lauren Foster, a marketing executive who considered herself Mike's professional peer, made obligatory small talk about lesson plans while clearly waiting for someone more interesting to arrive. These were the people Mike loved, the friends who had shaped him during his formative years, and I respected that bond even when their Treatment of me ranged from condescending to dismissive. They had created a narrative about our relationship that served their need to understand how their successful friend had ended up with someone so seemingly beneath his social and economic level. The narrative was simple, and to them, obvious. Mike, the generous and successful marketing manager, had fallen for the sweet but financially dependent elementary school teacher. He was the provider, the one who made their comfortable lifestyle possible, who funded their vacations and social activities while Emma focused on her little classroom and her modest teacher's salary. It was a story that made sense within their worldview, where worth was measured by income, status by job title, and value by visible wealth. What they couldn't see, what they had never bothered to investigate, was that appearances could be not just deceiving, but completely backward. The truth was that I had chosen teaching not because it was my only option, but because it was my passion. After graduating from Stanford with degrees in both education and business, I could have walked into any corporate boardroom or financial institution. The Thompson family name still carried weight in certain circles, especially in California, where Thompson Industries had been a respected manufacturing company for 3 generations. When my grandparents sold the company 10 years ago, the $85 million deal had been front-page news in the business section, though most people had forgotten the details in the years since. I was Catherine and William Thompson's only grandchild, the sole heir to a legacy built on innovation, integrity, and genuine value creation. My grandparents had started with a small machine shop and built it into a company that employed over 800 people across 4 states. When they decided to sell, it wasn't because the business was failing, but because they wanted to ensure its continued success under leadership that could take it into the next century. The sale had created the Thompson Family Trust, a carefully structured entity designed to preserve wealth across generations while supporting charitable causes that aligned with our family values. My portion of the trust, managed conservatively but effectively, was worth approximately $12 million, generating enough income to support whatever lifestyle I chose without ever touching the principal. I chose to live on my teacher's salary. The decision wasn't about proving a point or making a statement about wealth inequality, though I certainly had opinions on both topics. It was about authenticity, about building a life based on what brought me joy rather than what impressed others. Teaching 3rd grade at Maplewood Elementary filled my days with purpose, laughter, and the kind of meaningful impact that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or stock prices. The children in my classroom didn't care that I drove a Honda Civic instead of a BMW, or that I shopped at Target instead of Nordstrom. They cared that I remembered their birthdays, celebrated their reading milestones, and created a safe space where they could learn and grow. That satisfaction was worth more to me than any luxury lifestyle could provide. Mike had never known about the trust when we met 7 years ago at a Riverside Community Garden volunteer event. He was there because his company had encouraged employee volunteer work. I was there because I genuinely enjoyed community service and had been helping with the garden since moving to Riverside. We bonded over shared humor about our complete ignorance of proper composting techniques and our mutual inability to tell weeds from vegetables. Our relationship had grown slowly, built on genuine compatibility rather than financial attraction. Mike appreciated my down-to-earth nature, my lack of drama, and my contentment with simple pleasures like hiking, reading, and cooking together. I loved his kindness, his work ethic, and his loyalty to the people he cared about, even when those people didn't necessarily deserve it. When he proposed 3 years into our relationship, it was after a perfectly imperfect day of hiking that ended with us both muddy and laughing on a park bench. The ring was modest, chosen with careful attention to his budget, and I treasured it not for its monetary value, but for what it represented about his character and our partnership. We had married in a simple ceremony at the Riverside Botanical Gardens, surrounded by close family and friends. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My cousin Sarah had flown in from Boston. Maggie Patterson had attended as both family friend and professional advisor, and Mike's college friends had made the appropriate appearances while clearly wondering why he was settling for someone so ordinary. The past 5 years of marriage had been genuinely happy. We lived in a comfortable 3-bedroom house in the Oakwood neighborhood, nothing fancy but perfectly suited to our needs. Mike believed we were living on our combined salaries, which provided a comfortable middle-class lifestyle with occasional splurges on travel or entertainment. What he didn't know was that several of his business initiatives had been quietly supported by strategic investments from my trust. 2 years ago, when Mike wanted to launch a freelance marketing consultancy on the side, he had struggled to secure the initial capital needed for equipment and marketing materials. A timely bonus from my school district, which he never questioned, had provided the funding he needed. When his car had died last year, and he was worried about the impact of a car payment on our budget, an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative I'd never mentioned had appeared just in time. These financial interventions were never large, enough to seem suspicious, never so generous as to change our basic lifestyle. But they provided the security and opportunities that allowed Mike to pursue his goals without stress. I had never wanted him to feel indebted to me or to question whether our relationship was built on genuine love or financial dependence. The irony of Jessica's accusation this evening was that she had gotten the dynamic exactly backward. Mike wasn't supporting me. I had been quietly supporting him, ensuring that he never had to worry about money while building his career and maintaining his friendships with people who valued financial success above almost everything else. As the appetizers were served, and conversation flowed around topics of vacation homes, investment portfolios, and luxury purchases, I found myself observing the group dynamics with the detached interest of an anthropologist. These people, Mike's chosen family, had created an ecosystem based on competitive consumption and social positioning. Every story was subtly designed to establish hierarchy. Every purchase was a statement about status. Every relationship was evaluated through the lens of mutual benefit. Jessica, as the unofficial leader of the group, wielded her influence through a combination of social media success, real estate achievements, and her relationship with Ryan, whose banking career provided both credibility and financial resources. She had positioned herself as the arbiter of taste and appropriateness, the one who determined who belonged and who didn't. Ashley and Ryan supported Jessica's social leadership while focusing on their own areas of expertise, fashion and finance. Respectively, David and Lauren rounded out the group as successful professionals who provided intellectual credibility and professional networking opportunities. Together, they formed a closed circle that had been intact since college, resistant to outsiders, and suspicious of anyone who might disrupt their established dynamics. I had never quite fit their template for Mike's appropriate partner. I lacked the professional ambition they respected, the material interests they shared, and the social, media presence they considered essential. My contentment with my teaching career baffled them, my lack of interest in status symbols confused them, and my apparent financial dependence on Mike concerned them as friends who wanted to protect him from being taken advantage of. Their concern might have been touching if it weren't so misguided. As the main course was served, conversation turned to recent achievements and upcoming plans. Jessica dominated the discussion with stories about her latest real estate successes, the new clients she was attracting through Instagram, and the vacation home she and Ryan were considering in Lake Tahoe. Ashley described the expansion plans for her boutique, while David shared details about a high-profile case that was generating significant media attention. Mike contributed enthusiastically, sharing updates about his consulting business and some recent client successes. I could see the pride in his eyes as he talked about projects he was passionate about, achievements that represented not just professional growth, but personal fulfillment. What his friends didn't know was that the financial security provided by my quiet support had given him the confidence to take risks and pursue opportunities he might otherwise have avoided. Lauren turned the conversation toward me with the kind, of forced interest that felt more like obligation than genuine curiosity. "So, Emma, how's the teaching going? Still working with the little ones?" Her tone carried the subtle condescension I had grown accustomed to over the years, the implication that teaching elementary school was somehow less challenging or important than their professional pursuits. I smiled and shared some recent classroom successes, including a reading program I had developed that was being adopted by other schools in the district. The achievements were genuine and significant within the education world, but I could see their eyes glazing over as I spoke. "That's so sweet," Ashley commented, the word sweet carrying all the dismissiveness it was intended to convey. "It must be nice to have such a relaxed job. No pressure, no real deadlines, summers off. Mike is so good to make sure you can pursue your little passion project." The assumption was clear and completely wrong, but I had learned long ago that correcting these misconceptions required revealing more about my background than I was comfortable sharing. Instead, I nodded and changed the subject, allowing them to maintain their illusions while privately amused by how far off the mark they were. As dessert was served and the evening began to wind down, I found myself reflecting on the strange position I occupied in this group. They saw me as Mike's burden, the sweet but financially dependent wife who limited his social mobility and professional networking opportunities. The reality was that I was probably the wealthiest person in the room, with resources that could have funded all of their lifestyles combined. But wealth, I had learned, wasn't about what you had. It was about what you chose to do with what you had. I chose to live authentically, to find purpose in meaningful work, and to support the people I loved without requiring recognition or gratitude. These were values that my grandparents had instilled in me, lessons learned not from financial advisors or business schools, but from two people who had built something meaningful and wanted to ensure their legacy was about more than money. The BI Thompson Family Trust wasn't just a financial instrument, it was a responsibility. My grandparents had created it not to fund lavish lifestyles for their descendants, but to support causes they believed in while providing their family with the security to pursue meaningful work, rather than simply lucrative work. The Heritage Foundation, which I managed quietly through Maggie Patterson's legal office, supported educational initiatives, community development projects, and small business grants throughout Riverside and surrounding communities. Jessica's friends knew nothing about these activities, nothing about the genuine impact that Thompson money was having in their own community. They measured worth by visible consumption, success by public recognition, and value by social media metrics. The quiet philanthropy that formed the cornerstone of my family's legacy was invisible to them because it wasn't designed to generate attention or admiration. As the evening progressed toward its conclusion, I should have known that Jessica wasn't finished with her performance. She had been building toward something all night, making subtle comments about financial responsibility, dropping hints about people who took advantage of generous partners, and positioning herself as Mike's protective friend who had his best interests at heart. The attack, when it came, was delivered with the precision of someone who had been planning it for weeks. "You know, Mike," Jessica said, raising her champagne flute in what appeared to be a toast, "we've all been talking, and we just want you to know how much we admire your generosity. Supporting Emma's teaching career, funding your comfortable lifestyle on your income alone, making sure she doesn't have to worry about the real world. It's really admirable." The words were carefully chosen, designed to sound complimentary while delivering a clear message about perceived financial dynamics. Mike's expression shifted slightly, confusion replacing his earlier happiness as he tried to understand where Jessica was heading with her comments. "I mean," Jessica continued, building momentum as she sensed she had the room's attention, "not every successful man would be so willing to carry the financial load for someone who chose such a limited career path. But that's what love is, right? Sacrifice?" The implied criticism was obvious to everyone present. Jessica was positioning me as a financial burden. a woman who had chosen an easy career path and expected Mike to fund the difference. Her audience was nodding along, comfortable with this narrative that confirmed their existing assumptions about our relationship dynamics. That's when she delivered the line that would change everything. "So you're the teacher who got lucky, huh? Must be nice having Mike pay for everything while you play with crayons all day?" The silence that followed was deafening. 30 people stopped their conversations, stopped their eating, stopped their drinking, and turned to stare at me. Some looked embarrassed by Jessica's directness. Others seemed to nod in agreement with her assessment. Mike's face had gone pale, clearly caught between loyalty to his wife and his desire not to create conflict with his oldest friends. I sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of their judgment, their assumptions, their complete misunderstanding of who I was and what I brought to my marriage with Mike. For 5 years, I had allowed them to believe whatever made them comfortable, had never corrected their misconceptions or defended my choices. I had valued peace over accuracy, harmony over truth. But sometimes, truth has its own timeline, and apparently, that timeline had arrived. I smiled calmly, reached for my purse, and pulled out my phone. What they were about to learn would change everything they thought they knew about me, about my marriage to Mike, and about the assumptions they had built their judgments on. The quiet elementary school teacher was about to show them exactly who she really was, and the revelation would shatter their carefully constructed worldview in ways they could never have imagined. Sometimes the most satisfying moments come not from planning or scheming, but from simply allowing the truth to emerge when the time is right. And Jessica Collins had just chosen the perfect moment for my truth to finally come to light. The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. At any moment, I could feel Mike's hand reach for mine under the table, his palm slightly damp with nervous perspiration. He squeezed gently, a gesture meant to offer support, but I could sense his confusion. For 5 years of marriage, he had never seen me, in a situation quite like this, had never witnessed me being attacked so directly and publicly. His loyalty was absolute, but his understanding of how to defend me was limited by the same misconceptions that fueled Jessica's confidence. "Emma," he started, his voice steady but strained. "Maybe we should just—" I placed my other hand over his, a gentle signal that I could handle this myself. Mike had always been my protector when it came to small slights and minor rudeness, but this moment required a different kind of response. This wasn't about hurt feelings or social awkwardness. This was about fundamental assumptions that had shaped how his closest friends viewed our marriage, viewed me, and viewed him. Jessica stood there savoring what she clearly believed was her moment of triumph. Her champagne flute caught the light from the crystal chandelier, and her smile held all the satisfaction of someone who had finally said what everyone else was thinking, but had been too polite to voice. She had positioned herself as the truth teller, the friend brave enough to call out what she saw as an obvious imbalance in Mike's marriage. "I'm just saying what we've all been thinking," she continued, emboldened by what she interpreted as my stunned silence. "Mike works incredibly hard to build his career, to maintain his lifestyle, to keep up with all of us. And you." She gestured vaguely in my direction, as if my very presence explained everything wrong with the situation. "You get to play teacher and let him handle all the real responsibilities." Ryan nodded along with his girlfriend's assessment, his banker's mind clearly calculating what he assumed were the financial dynamics of our household. Ashley pursed her lips in what might have been sympathy or agreement, while David maintained the neutral expression he probably used in courtrooms when listening to testimony he found unconvincing. "Jessica," Lauren said quietly, perhaps sensing that the attack had gone too far. "Maybe this isn't the time or place." "Oh, please," Jessica waved off the weak protest. "We're all adults here. We're all friends. Shouldn't we be honest with each other?" She turned her attention back to me, her voice taking on a tone of mock concern. Emma, sweetie, don't you ever feel guilty? I mean, Mike could have married anyone. Someone with ambition, someone who could match his success, someone who could contribute equally to building a real future together. The implication was clear and cutting. In Jessica's worldview, I was dead weight, a charity case that Mike had inexplicably chosen to carry. The other friends might not have expressed it so bluntly, but their silence suggested a level of agreement that made the moment even more charged. I looked around the table at these people who had known Mike since college, who had celebrated his successes and supported him through challenges, who considered themselves his chosen family. They had crafted a narrative about our relationship that served their need to understand why their successful friend had settled for someone they considered beneath his potential. The narrative was so firmly established in their minds that they had never questioned it, never looked deeper, never considered that appearances might be deceiving. Mike's face had flushed red, and I could see him struggling between his desire to defend me and his lifelong habit of avoiding conflict with this particular group. These were the people who had been there for him through college heartbreaks, career changes, and family crises. Their opinion mattered to him in ways that sometimes worried me, but I had never wanted to force him to choose between me and friendships that predated our relationship. "You know what, Jessica?" I said finally, my voice calm and measured. "You're absolutely right about one thing. We should be honest with each other." Something in my tone must have caught her attention because her triumphant expression flickered slightly. She had expected tears, embarrassment, or defensive anger. The composed confidence in my response wasn't part of the script she had written for this confrontation. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, opening the banking app that I rarely used in public. The screen illuminated with numbers that would have made Jessica's real estate commissions look like pocket change, but I wasn't quite ready for that revelation yet. First, I wanted to address the assumptions that had led to this moment. "You're right that Mike and I should be honest about our financial situation," I continued, setting the phone face down on the table where everyone could see it, but not yet read the screen. "And you're right that successful people deserve partners who contribute equally to building a future together." Jessica's smile returned, apparently interpreting my words as confirmation of her accusations. "Exactly. I'm so glad you understand. It's not personal, Emma. It's just that we all care about Mike, and we want what's best for him." The condescension in her voice was breathtaking. She had positioned herself as the concerned friend looking out for Mike's interests, while simultaneously humiliating his wife in front of 30 people. The other friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, probably wishing they were anywhere else but clearly unwilling to challenge Jessica's authority within their social structure. "That's very thoughtful of you," I replied, my tone remaining perfectly pleasant. "I'm curious, though. In all your concern for Mike's financial well-being, did you ever wonder where the money came from for his consulting business startup costs 2 years ago?" Mike's hand tightened around mine. He had never questioned the timing of that unexpected bonus I'd mentioned, had been too excited about launching his side business to analyze the convenient coincidence. Now, with 30 pairs of eyes watching, I could see him starting to piece together connections he had never considered before. Jessica's confidence wavered slightly. I assumed Mike had saved up, or maybe gotten a business loan. Or when his car died last year and he was worried about payments impacting our budget, I continued. Did you wonder how that inheritance from my distant relative materialized at exactly the right moment? The color was starting to drain from Jessica's face. Ryan's banker instincts were clearly alerting him that this conversation was heading in an unexpected direction. Ashley had stopped eating entirely, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth, as she tried to process the implications of my questions. Mike turned to look at me directly, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. "Emma? What are you saying?" I smiled at my husband, the man I had loved and protected for 7 years, who had built his dreams on a foundation he didn't know I had provided. I'm saying that maybe it's time our friends understood the real dynamics of our relationship. I picked up my phone and turned the screen toward the table. The banking app showed the current balance of my primary checking account, the one connected to my portion of the Thompson family trust. The number that appeared was larger than most people's annual salaries, and it was just my spending account, not the trust principal or investment portfolios. The silence that followed was different from the earlier tension. This was the silence of minds struggling to process information that contradicted everything they had believed. Jessica's champagne flute froze halfway to her lips, her mouth slightly open as she stared at the screen. Ryan's professional composure cracked as his brain automatically calculated what kind of assets would generate that level of readily available cash. That's impossible, Jessica stammered, her voice losing all its earlier authority. You're a teacher. Teachers don't have... She couldn't even finish the sentence. Teachers don't have what? I asked gently. Money? Family wealth? Investment portfolios? Trust funds? I slid my finger across the screen, opening a different account, this one showing my investment holdings. You're right that teachers' salaries aren't usually this substantial. Fortunately, teaching is something I choose to do, not something I have to do. Ashley found her voice first. I don't understand. If you have this kind of money, why do you live in Oakwood? Why do you drive a Honda? Why do you shop at Target? The questions tumbled out of her as she tried to reconcile the evidence on my phone screen with everything she thought she knew about me. Her boutique served wealthy women who expressed their status through designer purchases, women whose identity was built around visible consumption. My choices made no sense within her framework for understanding wealth. Because those things make me happy, I replied simply. My house is comfortable, my car is reliable, and Target has everything I need. I don't measure my worth by what I own or what others think about what I own. David, the lawyer, had recovered enough to ask the question that was probably occurring to everyone. Where does this money come from? What kind of family wealth are we talking about? I had hoped to avoid this level of detail, but Jessica's public attack had eliminated the option of partial truth. If I was going to defend myself and set the record straight, it needed to be complete and verifiable. Thompson Industries, I said quietly. My grandparents built it from a machine shop into a manufacturing company that employed over 800 people. When they sold it 10 years ago, the proceeds established the Thompson Family Trust. I'm the primary beneficiary. The name registered with Ryan immediately. As an investment banker, he would have been aware of major business transactions in California, especially ones involving companies with long-established reputations. Thompson Industries was sold for $85 million, he said slowly, his professional knowledge filling in the gaps. The Thompson Family Trust. You're that Thompson. I nodded, watching as the implications rippled through the group's understanding. They were recalculating everything they thought they knew about me, about my marriage to Mike, about the financial dynamics they had been so confident in judging. Mike was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been hurt. Emma, why didn't you tell me? We've been married for 5 years. How could you keep something this significant secret? The pain in his voice cut deeper than Jessica's attacks ever could. This was the conversation I had hoped to never have. The revelation that would inevitably change our relationship in ways I couldn't predict or control. Mike had fallen in love with a woman he thought was his financial equal, someone building a life with him through shared effort and modest means. Learning that I had been capable of funding any lifestyle we wanted while allowing him to worry about money had to feel like a fundamental deception. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have, I said, reaching for his hand again. He didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze back either. Because I wanted our relationship to be built on genuine compatibility, not financial. attraction, or obligation. But I could have made different choices, Mike said, his voice strained. I could have taken bigger risks with my career, could have pursued opportunities I passed up because I was worried about our financial security. You let me carry that stress when you could have eliminated it completely. He was right, and I had known this day would come eventually. The secret had protected our relationship from complications, but it had also built a barrier between us. That was now impossible to ignore. Every financial worry he had experienced, every opportunity he had declined out of caution, every night he had stayed awake calculating budgets and comparing our income to our dreams, had been unnecessary because of resources I chose not to reveal. Jessica had found her voice again, though it lacked the confident authority she had wielded minutes earlier. So, you've been lying to all of us for years, pretending to be something you're not, letting us think Mike was supporting you when actually... She couldn't finish the sentence because the implications were too staggering. If I had the kind of wealth my phone screen suggested, then every assumption about our relationship was not just wrong, but backwards. Mike wasn't supporting me. I had been quietly supporting him, providing the financial security that allowed him to take risks and pursue his dreams. I've never lied about anything, I corrected gently. I teach third grade at Maplewood Elementary because I love teaching. I live in a comfortable house because it makes me happy. I drive a reliable car because it serves my needs. The fact that I could afford more expensive alternatives doesn't make my choices deceptive. But you let us believe, Ashley started, then stopped, perhaps realizing that what I had let them believe was based on their own assumptions rather than anything I had actually claimed. I let you believe whatever made you comfortable, I agreed. Just like I let Mike believe we were building our life together on equal financial footing, because that's what made our relationship feel authentic to both of us. Lauren, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange, spoke up with a question that got to the heart of the matter. If you have this kind of wealth, why did you choose Mike? You could have had anyone, could have married into your own social class, could have found someone whose success matched your financial status. It was a fair question, and one that revealed how deeply ingrained their transactional view of relationships had become. In their world, people married within their economic class, combined resources to build bigger resources, and chose partners who enhanced their social and financial position. The idea that someone with significant wealth would choose a partner based on compatibility rather than status was genuinely confusing to them. I chose Mike because he's kind, intelligent, funny, and loyal, I said, looking at my husband whose expression was still unreadable. Because he makes me laugh, supports my dreams, and treats me as an equal partner in life. Because when we met, at that community garden volunteer day, he spent 3 hours helping me plant tomatoes wrong and never once made me feel stupid for not knowing what I was doing. But the money, Ryan started, his banker's mind still struggling with the practical implications. The money is just money, I interrupted. It provides security and options, but it doesn't create happiness or love or partnership. I've watched too many wealthy people live miserable lives to think that financial resources guarantee anything meaningful. Mike finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. The startup costs for my consulting business, the inheritance when my car died. How many other times, Emma? I met his gaze directly, knowing that complete honesty was the only path forward, even if it was painful. Every time you needed support to pursue something important to you. Every time financial stress was keeping you awake at night. I never wanted you to feel limited by money when you had so much talent and ambition. So I've been a kept man, he said, the words bitter in his mouth. Everything I thought I built, everything I thought I achieved on my own. You built everything. Yourself, I said firmly. The business skills, the client relationships, the reputation, the success. I just made sure money never held you back from showing the world what you were capable of. Jessica, who had been uncharacteristically quiet while processing the complete reversal of everything she thought she understood, suddenly straightened in her chair. Wait a minute. If you're independently wealthy, if you've been financially supporting Mike all these years, then what does that make all of us? The question hung in the air because everyone at the table understood its implications. If I was the wealthy one in my marriage with Mike, if I had been quietly providing financial support while they judged me as a burden, then their entire social dynamic was built on false assumptions. The teacher they had dismissed as beneath their friends' standards was actually the most financially successful person in the room. It was Ryan who voiced what everyone was thinking. Emma, exactly how much money are we talking about here? I hesitated for a moment, knowing that once I answered this question, there would be no going back to the comfortable anonymity I had maintained for 5 years. But Jessica's attack had eliminated the option of partial revelation, and Mike deserved to understand the full scope of what I had kept from him. The Thompson Family Trust is structured to support multiple generations, I said carefully. My portion is currently valued at approximately $12 million, generating enough income that I could live comfortably without ever working or working at any job I choose regardless of salary. The number hit the table like a physical blow. $12 million was more money than most of them would see in their lifetimes, more than their combined annual salaries, more than their mortgage balances and retirement accounts and investment portfolios added together. I wasn't just wealthy. I was wealthy enough to buy and sell their entire social circle without affecting my lifestyle. David, trained to think in terms of legal and financial structures, asked the obvious follow-up question. What about charitable giving, estate planning, tax implications? The Heritage Foundation, I replied. It's the family's charitable arm, supporting educational initiatives, community development, and small business grants throughout Riverside and surrounding areas. We've probably funded projects that have benefited everyone at this table in some way. Ashley's eyes widened as she made a connection. The Heritage Foundation sponsored the small business development program that helped me expand my boutique 3 years ago. That was you? I nodded, watching as she processed the realization that the woman she had been dismissing as financially dependent had actually contributed to her business success. The foundation's work touched dozens of projects throughout the community, from school programs to infrastructure improvements to business development initiatives, all funded quietly without publicity or recognition. My consulting business got a grant last year for technology upgrades, Mike said slowly, his voice filled with a mixture of wonder and dismay. I thought it was just a lucky break, a competitive application process. You earned that grant, I assured him. The foundation supports promising small businesses, and your application was genuinely competitive. I recused myself from the selection process specifically to avoid any conflict of interest. The revelation was layering complexity onto complexity. Not only had I been financially supporting Mike privately, but the family foundation I managed had been supporting his business publicly through legitimate grant programs. Every success he thought he had achieved independently had been touched, directly or indirectly, by resources I controlled. Jessica had gone completely silent, her earlier confidence replaced by what looked like genuine shock. The woman she had been attacking as a gold digger was not only wealthy beyond anything she had imagined, but had been quietly supporting the entire community through charitable work that received no public recognition. Why? She asked finally, her voice smaller than it had been all evening. Why keep it secret? Why let us think? Why let us treat you like... She couldn't finish the sentence, but we all understood what she was asking. Why had I allowed them to diminish me, to treat me as an outsider, to judge my worth based on false assumptions about my financial status and contribution to my marriage? Because I wanted authentic relationships, I said simply. I wanted people to know me for who I am, not what I have. I wanted Mike to love me for myself, not for my trust fund. I wanted to contribute to my community because it was the right thing to do, not because it would earn me recognition or social status. The answer seemed to stun them into silence. In their world, wealth was meant to be displayed, status was meant to be leveraged, and financial resources were tools for social advancement. The idea that someone would deliberately hide their advantages in order to build genuine relationships was foreign to their experience. Lauren spoke up with a question that seemed to be forming in everyone's mind. But how do we... what does this mean for our friendships? For how we've treated you? For everything we thought we knew? It was the question that would determine whether this revelation led to authentic new relationships or simply different forms of awkwardness and social positioning. They were faced with the uncomfortable reality that they had fundamentally misjudged someone they had known for 5 years, had treated poorly based on assumptions that were not just wrong, but completely backwards. Mike was still holding my hand, though his grip remained tense. Emma, we need to talk about this privately, about what this means for us, for our marriage, for the choices we've made based on what I thought was our financial reality. I nodded, understanding that this conversation was far from over. The public revelation had been necessary to address Jessica's attack, but the private implications for my marriage were complex and potentially damaging. Mike had every right to feel deceived, even if my motivations had been protective rather than manipulative. But first, there was one more element of truth that needed to emerge, because Jessica's attack had been based on more than just assumptions about my financial dependence. It had been rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of what marriage partnership meant, what contribution looked like, and what truly mattered in building a life together. The revelation of my wealth was just the beginning. What came next would determine whether this moment destroyed relationships or transformed them into something more authentic and meaningful than what had existed before. The weight of 30 people's stares pressed down on me like a physical force. In the span of 20 minutes, I had gone from being the dismissed elementary school teacher to the mysterious millionaire whose family foundation had been quietly supporting their community for years. The transformation was jarring not just for them, but for me as well. I had grown comfortable with my anonymity, with being overlooked and underestimated. Now, every face at the table reflected a different emotion: shock, embarrassment, curiosity, or in Jessica's case, something approaching horror at how completely she had misjudged the situation. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. David cleared his throat with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to navigating awkward legal depositions. Emma, I think I speak for everyone when I say we owe you an apology. Our assumptions were clearly wrong, and our behavior tonight was inappropriate. His lawyer's training allowed him to craft an apology that acknowledged error without admitting specific fault, but I could see genuine discomfort in his expression. David had always been the most professionally minded of Mike's friends, the one who measured people by their credentials and achievements rather than their social connections. Learning that I possessed wealth that dwarfed his legal practice's annual revenue was forcing him to recalibrate his entire assessment of my place in their social hierarchy. Ashley nodded vigorously, her boutique owner's instincts already working, to repair what she clearly recognized as a damaged relationship with someone whose spending power could significantly impact her business. I feel terrible about the assumptions we made. I had no idea about your family background or your contributions to the community. The Heritage Foundation's support was instrumental in my expansion, and I never connected that to you. Ryan remained quiet, his banker's mind probably calculating the implications of having dismissed someone whose liquid assets exceeded most of his institutional clients' portfolios. The professional embarrassment of misjudging someone's financial status so completely was written across his features. In his world, accurately assessing wealth was a crucial skill, and his failure to recognize mine represented a significant professional blind spot. Lauren looked genuinely stricken. Emma, I'm so sorry. The way we've talked about your teaching, The way we've acted like Mike was doing you some kind of favor by being with you. We were completely wrong about everything. Their apologies felt sincere but incomplete, focused on their embarrassment, about misjudging my financial status rather than examining the underlying attitudes that had led to their behavior. They were apologizing for being wrong about the facts, but not necessarily for the values that had made their treatment of me seem acceptable when they believed those facts to be different. Jessica hadn't spoken since learning about the trust, and she sat frozen in her chair, her champagne flute still suspended halfway to her lips, her confident expression replaced by something approaching devastation. The woman who had built her social leadership on her ability to read people and situations accurately had just experienced the most public failure of judgment imaginable. Everything she had said about me being a burden to Mike, everything she had implied about my character and motivations, had been not just wrong, but grotesquely backward. Mike's hand had grown cold in mine, and when I looked at him, I could see he was struggling with emotions far more complex than his friend's embarrassment. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice carrying undertones of hurt that cut deeper than any public humiliation could have. "I need to understand something. When I was stressed about money, when I was lying awake at night worrying about our budget, when I was making decisions based on what I thought we could afford, you knew you could solve all of that instantly, and you chose not to tell me." The question struck at the heart of what would determine whether our marriage survived this revelation intact. Mike wasn't angry about the money itself. He was struggling with what felt like a fundamental deception about our partnership. For 5 years, he had made choices based on financial constraints that didn't actually exist, had carried stress about providing for our future that I could have eliminated with a single conversation. "I wanted our relationship to be authentic," I said, knowing how inadequate the explanation sounded in the face of his pain. "I wanted you to make choices based on what you truly wanted, not on what my money could make possible. I wanted to know that you loved me for who I am, not for what I could provide." "But I could have been who I really am too," Mike replied, his voice gaining strength as he worked through his emotions. "I could have taken risks, pursued dreams, made choices based on passion instead of pragmatism. You protected me from financial stress, but you also protected me from the freedom that financial security could have provided." He was right, and I had known this day would come eventually. The secret that had preserved the authenticity of our relationship had also limited its potential, had forced Mike to operate within constraints that didn't actually exist. Every opportunity he had passed up out of financial caution, every dream he had deferred for practical reasons, every night he had worried about our future had been shaped by limitations I could have removed, but chose to maintain. "You're right," I admitted, feeling the full weight of what my choices had cost him. I was so focused on protecting our relationship from the complications that wealth can create that I didn't consider how the secrecy itself was a complication. I was trying to preserve something pure between us, but I ended up creating something false instead. Jessica finally found her voice, though it lacked any trace of the authority she had wielded earlier in the evening. "I don't understand," she said, her words barely above a whisper. "If you had this kind of money, if you could have had any life you wanted, why did you choose this?" She gestured vaguely around the table, at the group of people who had just finished demonstrating exactly why someone might prefer anonymity to recognition. The question revealed more about Jessica's worldview than she probably intended. In her understanding, wealth was meant to be leveraged for social advancement, used to gain access to exclusive circles and elevated status. The idea that someone would deliberately choose a modest lifestyle and middle-class social connections when they could afford luxury and elite society was genuinely incomprehensible to her. "Because this makes me happy," I replied simply. "Teaching children gives me purpose. Living in a comfortable home in a good neighborhood provides everything I need. Having friends who value authenticity over status creates genuine connections. The money provides security and options, but it doesn't create meaning or fulfillment. Ryan spoke up, his professional curiosity apparently overcoming his embarrassment. But the investment opportunities, the business ventures, the networking, possibilities. You're talking about walking away from enormous potential returns and connections. His banker's perspective couldn't comprehend choosing security over growth, contentment over accumulation. In his world, wealth was a tool for generating more wealth, and my approach represented a fundamental misunderstanding of how money should be managed and leveraged. "I'm not walking away from anything," I corrected. "The trust is managed professionally, the investments perform well, and the foundation creates the kind of returns that matter to me. I'm just not organizing my life around maximizing financial gains or social status." Ashley leaned forward, her boutique owner's understanding of luxury consumption making her particularly puzzled by my choices. "But Emma, you could shop anywhere, travel anywhere, live anywhere. You could have designer clothes, luxury cars, a mansion in the hills. Don't you want those things?" The question highlighted the gap between our values that had made their assumptions about me seem reasonable to them. In Ashley's experience, people with money displayed it through their purchases, their homes, their lifestyles. My choice to live modestly while possessing significant wealth was as foreign to her as choosing to be hungry while surrounded by food. "I have everything I want," I said honestly. "A job I love, a home that makes me comfortable, a car that's reliable, and relationships built on genuine connection. Adding expensive things to that wouldn't improve my life. It would just complicate it." Lauren, who had been quietly observing the exchange, asked a question that seemed to get closer to the heart of the matter. "But don't you worry about people taking advantage of you? About friends or partners being attracted to your money rather than to you?" The irony of the question wasn't lost on anyone at the table. These were the people who had been judging me for supposedly taking advantage of Mike's financial success, when the reality was exactly the opposite. Their concern about my vulnerability to gold diggers seemed absurd, given that they had just spent the evening treating me as one. "That's exactly why I kept it private," I explained. "I wanted relationships based on who I am, not what I have. I wanted Mike to love me for my character, not my bank account. I wanted friendships built on shared interests and values, not financial networking opportunities." Mike's expression had shifted from hurt to something more complex, a mixture of understanding and continued confusion. "But Emma, we're supposed to be partners. Partners share important information, make decisions together, plan for the future, based on accurate understanding of their resources and options. How could you build a partnership on such a fundamental secret?" It was the question I had been dreading because it struck at the core contradiction in my approach. I had wanted an authentic relationship while maintaining a deception about something that affected every aspect of our life together. I had wanted Mike to love me for who I truly was, while preventing him from knowing a crucial part of who that was. I was afraid, I admitted, the words harder to say than I had expected. I was afraid that knowing about the money would change how you saw me, how you saw our relationship, how you made choices about your own life and career. I'd seen too many relationships become transactional when significant wealth was involved. "So instead, you made our relationship based on incomplete information," Mike said, not accusingly, but with the weariness of someone trying to process a fundamental shift in his understanding of his own life. "I've been making decisions for 5 years based on financial realities that didn't exist." David, perhaps sensing that the conversation between Mike and me was reaching a point that required privacy, attempted to redirect the group's attention. "I think we all need to process what we've learned tonight and consider how we want to move forward. Emma, we clearly owe you more than just apologies. We need to examine the assumptions and attitudes that led to our behavior." His suggestion that the group needed to reflect on their values was appropriate, but it also felt like an attempt to avoid the more immediate discomfort of confronting what their treatment of me revealed about their character. They were ready to acknowledge their mistake in assessing my financial status, but less prepared to examine the underlying beliefs that had made their dismissive treatment seem justified. Jessica finally spoke again, her voice carrying a vulnerability. I had never heard from her before. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. During all these years, when I was treating you the way I did, what did you think of us? What did you think of me?" The question was brave in its way, asking for a judgment that she clearly feared but felt she needed to hear. Jessica had built her identity around her social perceptiveness, her ability to read situations and people accurately. Learning that she had been so fundamentally wrong about me was forcing her to question everything she thought she knew about herself and her relationships. I considered how to answer honestly without being unnecessarily cruel. "I thought you were protective of Mike and wanted what you believed was best for him. I thought you were operating from values that prioritized financial success and social status in ways that I didn't share, but that seemed important to you and your friends. But you must have thought we were horrible people," Ashley interjected. "We treated you like you were beneath us, like you didn't belong in Mike's life. If you knew all along that you were more successful than any of us." "Success means different things to different people," I replied. "You measure it by income, possessions, and social position. I measure it by purposeful work, authentic relationships, and positive impact. Neither approach is inherently right or wrong. They're just different." Ryan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "But you must have been angry sometimes. You must have wanted to put us in our place, to show us how wrong we were about you." "Anger would have required me to care more about your opinions than I did," I said honestly. "I was sometimes frustrated that your assumptions about me affected Mike, but I wasn't invested enough in your approval to be genuinely angry about not having it." The honesty of my response seemed to sting more than harshness would have. They were confronting the reality that the person they had been dismissing and judging had been largely indifferent to their judgment. I hadn't been struggling for their acceptance or suffering from their rejection. I had simply been living my life according to my own values while tolerating their behavior for Mike's sake. Lauren spoke up with a question that seemed to address something that had been bothering her. "The community work, the foundation projects, the grants and funding. You've been helping build this community while we thought you were just some teacher who didn't contribute anything meaningful. How do you process that irony?" "The work speaks for itself," I replied. "The children I teach, the projects the foundation supports, the small businesses that receive grants, the community programs that get funding. Those outcomes exist regardless of who gets credit or recognition for making them possible." Mike had been listening to this exchange with increasing intensity, and I could see him processing not just the revelation about my wealth, but the deeper implications about my character and values that were emerging through my responses to his friends' questions. The woman he had married was turning out to be not just wealthier than he had known, but more complex, more principled, and more self-possessed than he had realized. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need to understand something else. When you made those anonymous contributions to my business, when you arranged for that timing that seemed so coincidental, how much of our life together has been shaped by your money in ways I didn't know about?" It was a painful question because the answer was more extensive than either of us was comfortable acknowledging. My financial resources hadn't just provided security. They had created opportunities, eliminated stress, and enabled choices that had shaped the entire trajectory of our relationship and his career development. "More than I should have allowed without telling you," I admitted. I told myself that I was just removing obstacles that would have prevented you from showing your true capabilities, but I was also making decisions about our life without your knowledge or consent. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of our server, who had been tactfully absent during the intense emotional revelations of the past hour. The appearance of someone focused on mundane concerns like clearing dessert plates and offering coffee felt surreal, given the depth of the personal reckonings taking place around the table. "Could we have a few more minutes?" Mike asked, his voice strained but polite. The server nodded and retreated, leaving us to continue processing the complete restructuring of relationships and assumptions that had defined our social circle for years. Jessica had been uncharacteristically quiet during the recent exchange, but she suddenly straightened in her chair with an expression that suggested she had reached some kind of internal decision. "Emma, I need to say something, and I need to say it in front of everyone here." Her voice carried a new quality, less confident than her earlier attacks, but more genuine than her previous attempts at apology. Whatever she was preparing to say felt significant, like a moment that would determine whether this evening led to authentic growth or simply different forms of social awkwardness. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened tonight, everything we've learned, everything I've said and done, and I realize that this isn't just about being wrong about your financial situation. This is about me being wrong about what matters, about what makes someone valuable, about what friendship and loyalty actually mean." She paused, seeming to gather courage for what came next. "I've been so focused on protecting Mike from what I saw as your limitations that I never considered whether I was protecting him from something valuable instead. I never asked whether my definition of success was the only valid one, or whether your approach to life might have something to offer that mine lacks." The admission was remarkable coming from Jessica, whose social authority had always been built on her certainty about social hierarchies and appropriate behavior. She was not just acknowledging factual errors, but questioning the fundamental values that had shaped her judgment and behavior. "I don't know how to process the fact that the person I've been dismissing as unworthy of my friend has been quietly supporting our entire community while asking for nothing in return. I don't know how to reconcile the fact that you've shown more grace under attack than I've shown in a position of assumed power." Mike reached for my hand again, this time with a grip that felt more supportive than confused. Whatever complex emotions he was still processing about my secrecy, he seemed to be recognizing that the woman he had married possessed depths of character that he was only beginning to understand. "Jessica," I said gently, "people can grow and change. Values can evolve. Relationships can be rebuilt on better foundations if everyone is willing to do the work." Her eyes filled with tears, a display of vulnerability that seemed to shock her friends almost as much as my financial revelations. "I don't know if I deserve that kind of generosity from you. I don't know if any of us do." The evening had transformed from a birthday celebration into something much more significant, a reckoning with assumptions, values, and the authentic foundations required for meaningful relationships. What happened next would determine whether this moment of crisis became a catalyst for genuine growth, or simply another social drama that everyone would prefer to forget. The silence that followed Jessica's vulnerability was different from all the others that had punctuated this extraordinary evening. This wasn't the shocked silence of revelation or the uncomfortable silence of embarrassment. This was the contemplative quiet of people genuinely considering whether they were prepared to examine and possibly change fundamental aspects of how they understood relationships, success, and human worth. Mike broke the silence first, his voice carrying a new resolve that hadn't been there earlier. "Emma, I need some time to process all of this, but I want you to know that I understand why you made the choices you did. I may not agree with keeping such a significant secret, but I can see that your motivations came from love rather than deception." His words offered a lifeline I hadn't dared to hope for. The past hour had revealed not just my hidden wealth, but the complex ways that secrecy had shaped our marriage, sometimes protecting it and sometimes limiting it. Mike's willingness to work through these revelations rather than retreating from them suggested a strength in our relationship that even my fears about money's corrupting influence hadn't been able to destroy. I love you for exactly the reasons you hoped I would, he continued, his hand tightening around mine. Your kindness, your principles, your commitment to work that matters to you, rather than work that pays the most. Learning about your family's wealth doesn't change any of those qualities that made me fall in love with you. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was tempered by awareness that we still had significant work ahead of us. Trust, once compromised by secrecy, required intentional effort to rebuild, regardless of the good intentions that had motivated the original concealment. Ashley spoke up, her voice tentative but sincere. Emma, I know this might sound hollow, given how we've treated you, but I'd like to learn from your approach to life. I've been so focused on accumulating things, on displaying success through purchases and possessions, that I've never really considered whether those things actually make me happy or just make me look successful to other people. Her admission represented a significant shift from someone whose business was built on selling luxury to people who measured worth through acquisition. The boutique owner was questioning not just her personal choices, but the fundamental assumptions underlying her professional identity. Happiness is different for everyone, I replied gently. The key is being honest about what actually brings you fulfillment versus what you think should bring you fulfillment based on other people's expectations. Ryan, who had been quietly calculating the implications of my wealth throughout the evening, finally voiced what appeared to be a professional epiphany. Emma, I've spent my entire career helping wealthy clients manage and grow their assets, but I've never worked with someone who seemed genuinely content with what they had rather than constantly seeking more. Your approach challenges everything I thought I knew about the psychology of wealth. His comment revealed how rare my perspective apparently was among the financially successful people he encountered professionally. The banker was confronting the possibility that his understanding of how wealth should be managed and leveraged was incomplete, missing a dimension that prioritized contentment over accumulation. David leaned forward with the systematic thinking that characterized his legal training. I'm curious about the Foundation's work, Emma. You mentioned educational initiatives and community development. What kinds of projects have you supported? And how do you decide where to direct resources? The question suggested genuine interest rather than social obligation, a shift toward viewing me as someone whose expertise and perspective had value rather than someone whose modest lifestyle indicated limited understanding of important matters. The Foundation focuses on projects that create sustainable impact rather than temporary relief, I explained. We fund educational programs that help children develop critical thinking skills, support small businesses that create local employment, and invest in infrastructure improvements that benefit entire communities. I pulled out my phone again, this time opening the Foundation's project tracking app rather than banking information. Last year, we supported the renovation of 3 elementary school libraries, provided startup grants for 12 local businesses, funded a job training program that helped 47 people transition to better employment, and supported community garden projects in 4 neighborhoods. The data represented hundreds of lives touched, dozens of families helped, countless children given better educational opportunities. These were the returns that mattered to me, measured not in percentage growth, but in human flourishing and community strengthening. Lauren studied the project list with obvious interest. This is exactly the kind of work my marketing firm tries to promote for our nonprofit clients, but most of them struggle with funding limitations. You're creating the foundation that makes meaningful impact possible. Her marketing professionals' understanding of nonprofit challenges gave her unique appreciation for what sustained, substantial funding could accomplish. She was seeing my wealth not as a tool for personal aggrandizement, but as a resource for community transformation. Jessica had been listening to this exchange with an expression that seemed to reflect deep internal wrestling. When she finally spoke, her voice carried none of the social authority that had characterized her earlier pronouncements. Emma, I need to ask you something personal, and I hope you'll be honest even if the answer is painful for me to hear." She paused, gathering courage for what was clearly a difficult question. "During all these years when I was treating you badly, when I was making comments about your marriage and your worth, did you ever think about using your resources to put me in my place? To show me how wrong I was in a way that would have humiliated me the way I was trying to humiliate you?" The question revealed Jessica's growing understanding that she had been attacking someone who possessed not just the wealth to retaliate, but the character to refrain from doing so. She was confronting the uncomfortable reality that I had shown restraint and grace while she had shown neither. "The thought never occurred to me," I answered honestly. "Humiliating you wouldn't have served any purpose except satisfaction, and that kind of satisfaction isn't worth the damage it would have caused to Mike's relationships and the group's dynamics." "But I deserve to be humiliated," Jessica said, her voice breaking slightly. "I deserve to face consequences for the way I've behaved, for the assumptions I've made, for the cruelty I've shown to someone who was quietly making my community better while asking for nothing in return." Her words reflected genuine remorse, but they also revealed a punitive mindset that had probably contributed to her judgmental behavior toward others. She was ready to accept punishment, but possibly less prepared for the harder work of examining and changing the attitudes that had led to her actions. "Jessica," I said gently, "consequences aren't always about punishment. Sometimes the most meaningful consequence is the opportunity to grow, to change, to build better relationships based on deeper understanding." Mike squeezed my hand, and I could see in his expression a mixture of pride in the woman he had married and amazement at aspects of my character he was discovering for the first time. "Emma's right," he said. "What matters now isn't looking backward, with regret, but moving forward with better understanding." The conversation was interrupted by the return of our server, who approached the table with obvious uncertainty about whether to offer coffee or simply present the check for what had clearly become an emotionally intensive evening. Mike gestured for the check, a small act that felt significant given everything we had discussed about financial dynamics and assumptions. "I'll take care of this," I said quietly, reaching for my purse. Mike started to object, then stopped himself, perhaps realizing that my offer represented not an assertion of financial dominance, but a gesture of partnership based on honest understanding of our resources. "Thank you," he said simply. As I handled the bill, I became aware that the evening's revelations had created a new set of challenges and opportunities. My anonymity was gone, replaced by a visibility that would inevitably change how people in our community related to me. The Foundation's work would now be associated with my name rather than operating in comfortable obscurity. My relationship with Mike would need to be rebuilt on a foundation of complete honesty rather than protective secrecy. But perhaps most significantly, the assumptions and attitudes that had shaped this group's social dynamics for years had been fundamentally challenged. Whether those challenges led to genuine growth or simply new forms of social positioning remained to be seen. David stood first, his lawyer's instincts apparently suggesting that the evening had reached a natural conclusion point. "Emma, thanks you for your patience with us tonight, and for your generosity in answering our questions honestly, even when they probably felt intrusive. And thank you for the work you've been doing in our community," Ashley added. "I had no idea how much the Foundation's support had contributed to local businesses and projects. You've been making a difference while the rest of us were just talking about making differences." Ryan nodded his agreement. "I'd like to learn more about the Foundation's investment approach, if you're willing to share. The sustainable impact model you described is something I'd like to understand better, both professionally and personally." Their comments suggested genuine interest in engaging with me as someone whose perspective and expertise had value, a significant shift from the dismissive tolerance that had characterized their previous interactions with me. Jessica stood last, her usual confident posture replaced by something more tentative. "Emma, I know I don't have any right to ask this, but I'd like the chance to have a real conversation with you sometime." Not about money or status or any of the things I was so focused on before, but about how you developed the values and perspectives that guided your choices tonight. Her request was remarkable coming from someone who had been attacking my character just hours earlier. She was asking not for forgiveness, which could be granted without requiring change, but for mentorship. In developing a different approach to relationships and success, I'd be happy to talk with you, I replied. We could start with coffee next week if you'd like. As the group began to gather their belongings and prepare to leave, Mike turned to address his friends with a seriousness that commanded their attention. I want all of you to know that Emma has been the best thing that ever happened to me, and that was true before tonight's revelations and remains true afterward. The woman I married chose to spend her life teaching children and supporting her community rather than pursuing wealth or status. And those choices reflect exactly the kind of character I was lucky enough to fall in love with. His defense of me felt different from his earlier attempts to avoid conflict. This wasn't diplomatic peacekeeping, but genuine appreciation for qualities he had always valued, but perhaps hadn't fully understood until tonight. The money doesn't change who she is, he continued. It just explains how she's been able to be so generous with her time, energy, and resources without worrying about her own security. She's been living according to her values rather than her bank account, and that's something worth respecting rather than criticizing. Jessica approached me as the others were saying their goodbyes, her expression vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. Emma, I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than just being wrong about your financial situation. I owe you an apology for treating another person the way I treated you, regardless of what I thought your circumstances were. Her words acknowledged that the real problem hadn't been her factual errors, but her fundamental approach to evaluating and treating other people. She was recognizing that even if her assumptions about my dependence on Mike had been correct, her behavior would still have been inappropriate and unkind. Apology accepted, I said simply. We all make mistakes in judgment. What matters is what we do with new understanding. As Mike and I drove home through the quiet streets of Riverside, the familiar landscape looked somehow different. The community I had been serving anonymously for years through the Foundation's work would now know me as its benefactor. The social circle that had defined much of Mike's adult social life had been fundamentally altered by revelations that changed their understanding of success, worth, and authentic relationship. Are you okay? Mike asked as we turned into our neighborhood, the modest houses of Oakwood looking exactly the same, despite everything that had changed about how we understood our place in the world. I'm relieved, I said honestly. I've been carrying the weight of that secret for so long that I forgot how heavy it was until it was gone. I'm still processing everything, Mike admitted. The money, the foundation work, the way you've been. Protecting me from financial stress while allowing me to worry about things you could have solved instantly. It's going to take time for me to understand all the implications. I know, I replied. And I know I should have told you years ago. I thought I was protecting our relationship, but I was also limiting it in ways that weren't fair to either of us. We sat in our driveway for a few minutes, looking at the house we had chosen together based on what Mike thought we could afford on our combined modest salaries. The 3-bedroom colonial with its small front yard and single-car garage represented everything we had thought we were building together. A comfortable middle-class life supported by hard work and careful budgeting. Do you want to change anything? Mike asked. Now that we don't have to live within the constraints I thought we had? I considered the question carefully. The house that had felt like home for 3 years still felt like home. The neighborhood where we knew our neighbors and participated in community events still felt like where we belonged. The lifestyle that had brought us happiness didn't suddenly seem inadequate because we could afford alternatives. Do you? I asked in return. Mike looked at our house, then at me, then smiled with something approaching his usual humor. You? Know what? I love our life. I love our house, our neighborhood, our routines. I love that you chose this life not because you had to, but because you wanted to. That makes it more special, not less." His response confirmed something I had hoped but hadn't dared to assume, that the authenticity of our relationship could survive the revelation of my deception. We had built something real together, something based on compatibility and shared values rather than financial necessity or social positioning. "There is one thing I'd like to change," I said as we finally got out of the car and walked toward our front door. "What's that?" "I'd like to tell you about the Foundation's work. Maybe get your input on projects and initiatives. You have great instincts about what kinds of support actually help people versus what just makes donors feel good about themselves." Mike's face lit up with interest. "I'd love that. I've always wanted to be more involved in community development work, but I thought we couldn't afford for me to take on unpaid projects." The irony made us both laugh. Mike had been limiting his charitable involvement because of financial constraints that didn't exist, while I had been supporting community development through resources he didn't know we had. Our partnership had been incomplete, not because we lacked shared values, but because we lacked complete information about our ability to act on those values together. Inside our house, surrounded by the furniture we had chosen carefully within our perceived budget, and the life we had built based on what we thought was possible, we began the conversation that would reshape our marriage. Not because our feelings had changed, but because our understanding of what we could build together had expanded beyond the limitations I had artificially maintained. The phone calls started the next morning. Ashley wanted to discuss foundation grants for small business development programs. David offered his legal services for foundation paperwork and compliance issues. Ryan requested a meeting about socially responsible investment strategies. Lauren proposed marketing support for foundation initiatives that could benefit from increased community awareness. Jessica's call came last, her voice carrying none of the confident authority that had characterized her social interactions for as long as I had known her. "Emma, I've been thinking all night about our conversation, about the person I've been and the person I want to become. I know I asked about coffee, but I wonder if there's something more substantial I could do to demonstrate that this isn't just temporary guilt, but genuine commitment to change." Her request led to a conversation about values, priorities, and the difference between achieving success and creating significance. Over the following weeks, Jessica began volunteering with foundation-supported literacy programs, using her social media influence to promote community development projects rather than personal brand building. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Years of established patterns don't disappear overnight, and Jessica occasionally reverted to her old habits of social positioning and competitive evaluation of others. But her willingness to examine and change her approach to relationships represented genuine growth, the kind that comes not from external pressure but from internal recognition that change is necessary. Mike's adjustment to our new financial reality proved more complex than either of us had anticipated. While he appreciated the security and opportunities my wealth provided, he also struggled with redefining his role as a provider and partner. We spent hours in conversation about how to build a true partnership when one person possessed significantly more financial resources than the other. The solution came through his increasing involvement in the foundation's work. Mike's background in marketing and business development proved invaluable in evaluating potential projects and designing programs that created sustainable impact rather than temporary relief. His contributions weren't financial, but they were essential, giving him a meaningful role in stewarding resources that technically belonged to me, but practically belonged to us. 6 months after that transformative evening at the Riverside Country Club, we hosted a foundation appreciation dinner at our modest home in Oakwood. The guest list included small business owners who had received grants, teachers whose classrooms had been supported, community leaders whose projects had been funded, and families whose lives had been improved through foundation initiatives. Ashley brought photos from her expanded boutique, showing how foundation support had enabled her to hire 3 additional employees and offer training programs for young people interested in retail careers. David presented legal documents establishing a new foundation partnership with the city that would streamline support for infrastructure improvements. Ryan had restructured his investment practice to focus on socially responsible portfolios, inspired by the foundation's approach to sustainable impact. Jessica arrived with a portfolio of social media analytics showing how her promotional work had increased community awareness of foundation programs, leading to a 300% increase in applications for small business grants and educational support. More importantly, she had begun using her influence to highlight other people's achievements rather than her own status and possessions. Mike served as the evening's host, presenting updates on foundation projects with the enthusiasm of someone who had found work that aligned with his values rather than just his financial needs. His role in evaluating and developing programs had given him ownership of our shared mission that was based on contribution rather than control. As I watched our guests, most of whom had no idea about the personal revelations that had sparked my decision to become more open about the foundation's work, I reflected on how much had changed since Jessica's attack at Mike's birthday party. The secret that had protected my relationships for years had ultimately limited them, creating barriers to authentic connection and collaborative purpose. The evening concluded with presentations from foundation grant recipients, people whose businesses, educational programs, and community projects had been supported through resources that I had inherited, but that Mike and I now managed together. Their stories of impact and transformation represented the kind of legacy my grandparents had envisioned when they established the trust. Wealth used not for personal aggrandizement, but for community building and human flourishing. Later that night, as Mike and I cleaned up from the dinner, he commented on how natural the evening had felt, how right it seemed to be open about our resources and their impact rather than hiding behind anonymity and modest appearances. "I understand now why you kept the secret initially," he said, loading dishes into our dishwasher. "And I understand why revealing it became necessary. Sometimes protecting something requires changing how you protect it." His words captured something essential about the journey we had traveled together. My original approach to protecting our relationship through secrecy had served its purpose. For a time, creating space for authentic connection to develop without the complications that wealth can introduce. But that protection had eventually become a limitation, preventing the full partnership and shared purpose that complete honesty made possible. The woman who had been accused of marrying for money had indeed built her life around financial resources, but not in the way Jessica and her friends had assumed. I had used inherited wealth not to gain social status or luxury lifestyle, but to create security that allowed for authentic choices, to support community development that made my neighbors' lives better, and ultimately to build partnerships based on shared values rather than financial necessity. The accusation that had seemed so devastating when Jessica hurled it across that elegant dining room had become the catalyst for revelations that strengthened rather than destroyed the relationships that mattered most. Sometimes the moments that feel like endings are actually beginnings, opportunities to rebuild on stronger foundations than existed before. Mike turned off the kitchen lights and took my hand, a gesture that had become routine over 5 years of marriage but felt renewed by everything we had learned about each other and ourselves. We had built something real together, something that had survived the test of complete honesty and emerged stronger for having been examined under the harsh light of truth. The money that had shaped so much of our story without our realizing, it would continue to provide security and opportunities, but it would no longer be a secret that created barriers between us and the people we cared about. We had learned that authentic relationships require not just love and compatibility, but also the courage to be completely known, with all the vulnerabilities and complications that complete knowledge brings. As we turned off the lights and headed upstairs to the bedroom of the modest house we had chosen together and loved together, I felt grateful for Jessica's attack that had forced truth into the open where it could be examined, processed, and ultimately integrated into relationships built on understanding rather than assumption. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the greatest challenges. The accusation that I had married for money had led to revelations that proved exactly the opposite. that love, authenticity, and shared purpose matter more than wealth, status, or social positioning. These were lessons worth learning, truths worth revealing, and foundations worth building a life upon. Jessica's tears had caught everyone off guard, including herself. The woman who had orchestrated this evening's humiliation now sat trembling in her chair, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she confronted the magnitude of her misjudgment. The champagne flute that had been raised in mock toast now sat abandoned on the white tablecloth, a crystal monument to her shattered assumptions. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the soft classical music that continued playing in the background, oblivious to the personal devastation unfolding in the private dining room. "Everything I thought I knew about success, about relationships, about what makes someone worthy of respect, it's all wrong." The vulnerability in her admission was startling. Jessica Collins, who had built her identity around reading people accurately and positioning herself as the social authority within their circle, was experiencing the complete collapse of her worldview. The teacher she had dismissed as unworthy of their successful friend had just revealed herself to be not only wealthier than anyone at the table, but operating from a value system that made Jessica's own priorities appear shallow and materialistic. Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside her, his investment banker's mind still processing the financial implications of what he had learned. "Jessica, maybe we should go home and talk about this privately," he suggested, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of her emotional breakdown. "No," Jessica said firmly, wiping her eyes with her napkin but making no attempt to hide her distress. "I humiliated Emma publicly. I need to face the consequences of that publicly." She looked directly at me, her eyes red but determined. "Emma, I spent this entire evening trying to expose you as a fraud, as someone taking advantage of Mike's generosity. But you're not the fraud here. I am." The statement hung in the air with devastating clarity. Jessica wasn't just admitting to being wrong about facts. She was acknowledging a fundamental dishonesty in how she had constructed her own identity and social relationships. "You've been quietly supporting this community, helping businesses succeed, funding educational programs, making real differences in people's lives," she continued, her voice gaining strength even as fresh tears appeared. "And what have I been doing? Posting Instagram photos of expensive meals and luxury purchases, trying to convince people that my worth is measured by what I can afford to buy." Ashley reached across the table to touch Jessica's hand, her own expression reflecting a similar internal reckoning. "Jess, we've all been focused on the wrong things. This evening has made that clear for all of us." "But I was the worst," Jessica insisted. "I was the one who attacked Emma's character, who questioned her motives, who tried to position myself as Mike's protector, when I was really just protecting my own sense of superiority." She turned back to me, her composure completely abandoned. "How do you forgive someone for that? How do you forgive someone for being so fundamentally wrong about what matters?" The question revealed the depth of her crisis. Jessica wasn't just embarrassed about misjudging my financial status. She was confronting the reality that her entire approach to evaluating people and relationships was flawed. The confident social leader who had always known exactly where everyone belonged in the hierarchy was discovering that the hierarchy itself was meaningless. Mike, who had been quietly processing his own complex emotions about my revelations, spoke up with surprising gentleness. "Jessica, I've known you for almost 20 years. You're capable of growth and change. This doesn't have to define who you are going forward." His words offered grace that Jessica clearly hadn't expected from the friend whose wife she had just finished attacking. The loyalty and forgiveness in his response seemed to affect her almost as much as my own revelations had. "But how do I change something this fundamental?" she asked, her voice breaking again. "How do I rebuild my understanding of what makes life meaningful when everything I've been pursuing turns out to be empty?" It was Lauren who provided an unexpected answer. "Maybe you start by asking different questions. Instead of asking what someone has, ask what they give. Instead of measuring success by accumulation, measure it by contribution. Instead of looking for ways to position yourself above others, look for ways to lift others up. The marketing executive's response suggested that Jessica wasn't the only one experiencing a philosophical awakening. The evening's revelations were forcing everyone to examine not just their assumptions about me, but their fundamental approaches to life and relationships. David, ever the lawyer, attempted to provide some practical structure to the emotional chaos unfolding around the table. I think we need to acknowledge that tonight has been transformative for all of us, but transformation takes time. We can't expect to change 20 years of thinking patterns in a single evening. His measured response was characteristic, but it also felt like an attempt to intellectualize emotions that were too raw and immediate for legal analysis. Jessica's breakdown wasn't about needing time to adjust. It was about confronting the possibility that she had wasted years pursuing things that didn't actually matter. "Emma," Jessica said suddenly, her voice carrying a new urgency. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. When you were sitting here listening to me attack your character, when you were watching me try to humiliate you in front of 30 people, what were you thinking?" The question demanded a level of honesty that could either begin healing or inflict deeper wounds. Jessica was asking me to reveal not just facts about my financial status, but my true assessment of her character and behavior. I considered my response carefully, knowing that whatever I said would significantly impact not just Jessica's ability to move forward, but the entire group's understanding of what authentic accountability looked like. "I was thinking that you were operating from fear," I said finally. "Fear that Mike might make choices that would threaten the group dynamics you felt responsible for maintaining. Fear that your understanding of social relationships might be incomplete. Fear that if you couldn't correctly identify who belonged and who didn't, your own position might become uncertain." The assessment was honest but not cruel, acknowledging the insecurity that had driven Jessica's behavior without excusing its impact. She absorbed my words with the focus of someone desperate to understand herself more clearly. "You're right," she admitted. "I have been afraid. Afraid that if I'm not the one who knows everyone's place, if I'm not the one who protects our group from outsiders, then I don't have a role. I don't have value." She paused, struggling with the vulnerability of complete honesty. "I built my identity around being the gatekeeper, the one who decided who was worthy of inclusion. But what if that role isn't valuable? What if it's actually harmful?" Her question struck at the heart of social dynamics that extended far beyond our particular group. Jessica was confronting the possibility that the leadership role she had cultivated for years was based on exclusion rather than inspiration, on maintaining barriers rather than building bridges. Mike reached across the table to place his hand over Jessica's, a gesture that seemed to surprise her. "Jess, you have so many positive qualities that have nothing to do with social positioning. You're intelligent, creative, hardworking, loyal to the people you care about. The problem isn't who you are, it's how you've been choosing to express those qualities." His words offered a path toward redemption that Jessica seemed afraid to hope for. The possibility that she could rebuild her identity around contribution, rather than control, around inclusion rather than exclusion, was clearly both appealing and terrifying. "I don't know how to do that," she confessed. "I don't know how to be valuable to people without being their protector or judge. I don't know how to contribute meaningfully when my entire skill set has been built around maintaining social hierarchies." Ryan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during Jessica's emotional processing, finally spoke up with an insight that surprised everyone. "Jessica, you have incredible influence through your real estate work and social media presence. What if you use that influence to highlight other people's achievements instead of your own status? What if you promoted community projects instead of luxury purchases?" The suggestion represented a complete inversion of how Jessica had been, using her platforms, but it also offered a concrete way to redirect her skills toward positive impact rather than personal aggrandizement. Ashley nodded enthusiastically. You could feature small businesses in your Instagram stories, promote community events, spotlight people who are making differences in ways that don't usually get recognition. You have the reach to actually help people instead of just impressing them. The possibilities seemed to energize Jessica in a way that nothing else had during the evening. The prospect of using her established influence for community building rather than personal branding offered a path toward meaningful contribution that built on her existing strengths. "Would you help me?" she asked, looking directly at me. "Would you help me understand what kinds of community projects need support? What kinds of recognition would actually benefit people, rather than just making me feel good about myself?" Her request was remarkable in its humility. The woman who had been attacking my character an hour earlier was now asking for my guidance in rebuilding her approach to life and relationships. "Of course," I replied. "The Foundation is always looking for partners who can help amplify our work and connect us with people who need support." The offer of partnership rather than mere guidance seemed to affect Jessica profoundly. Rather than positioning her as a reformed convert seeking redemption, I was inviting her to become a collaborator in work that mattered. Mike, who had been observing this exchange with expressions that ranged from amazement to pride, spoke up with a perspective that seemed to crystallize the evening's transformation. "You know what I find remarkable about all of this? Emma never defended herself by attacking anyone else. She never used her revelation about her wealth to make any of us feel small or foolish. She just told the truth and let us decide how to respond to it." His observation highlighted something I hadn't fully appreciated about my own approach. In a situation where I could have used my financial status to humiliate the people who had been dismissing me, I had chosen instead to simply provide information and allow them to process it according to their own consciences. "That's what real strength looks like," Lauren added. "Not dominating others, but maintaining your own integrity, regardless of how others treat you." The conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Maggie Patterson, the family attorney, who managed the Thompson Trust, appearing in the doorway of the private dining room with an expression of polite concern. "Emma, I apologize for the interruption," she said, "but I received several calls this evening from community organizations asking about foundation grant applications. Apparently, word has begun to spread about your involvement." Her arrival felt almost surreal given the intensity of the personal revelations that had been unfolding, but it also represented the practical reality that my anonymity was ending. The community work that had been conducted quietly for years was about to become public knowledge. "Maggie, I'd like you to meet Mike's friends," I said, gesturing around the table. "They've just learned about the Foundation's work, and some of them have expressed interest in supporting our initiatives." The introduction felt significant, representing a shift from secrecy to transparency that extended beyond just my marriage to encompass my entire social circle. Maggie, with her professional discretion and years of experience managing sensitive family matters, assessed the situation quickly and responded with appropriate tact. "How wonderful. The Foundation can always benefit from community partners who understand local needs and opportunities." Jessica, still emotional but clearly trying to regain some composure, stood up to introduce herself. "Ms. Patterson, I'm Jessica Collins. I work in real estate and have some social media influence in the community. I'd like to learn how I can help promote the Foundation's work." The simple introduction represented a complete transformation from the woman who had been attacking my character just hours earlier. Jessica was already beginning to redefine herself around contribution rather than status, around building rather than excluding. As the evening began to wind toward its conclusion, each member of Mike's friend group approached me individually to express their intentions for moving forward. Ashley wanted to create a small business support network that connected entrepreneurs with Foundation resources. David offered his legal expertise for foundation governance and compliance issues. Lauren proposed developing marketing strategies that would increase community awareness of available programs without compromising the foundation's focus on impact over recognition. Ryan, perhaps the most professionally affected by the evening's revelations, asked if he could schedule a meeting to discuss socially responsible investment strategies that aligned with the foundation's values. His banking career had been built around maximizing returns, but he was beginning to consider whether those returns could be measured in community impact as well as financial growth. Mike, meanwhile, had been processing his own role in this transformed landscape. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, he pulled me aside for a private conversation that felt both necessary and overdue. "Emma, I need you to know that I understand why you kept the trust fund secret, and I'm not angry about the money itself," he said, his voice carrying a seriousness that demanded my full attention. "But I am struggling with feeling like I've been living a life based on incomplete information. Every career decision I've made, every financial worry I've had, every opportunity I've passed up because I thought we couldn't afford it, all of that was shaped by limitations that didn't actually exist." His concern was legitimate and represented the most significant challenge to our marriage that the evening's revelations had created. Mike wasn't upset about my wealth, but he was grappling with how the secrecy had affected his own choices and development. "You're absolutely right," I acknowledged. "I was so focused on protecting our relationship from the complications that wealth can create that I didn't consider how the secrecy itself was limiting your options and creating stress that didn't need to exist. I don't want to carry resentment about this," Mike continued, "but I need to understand how we move forward as true partners when such a fundamental aspect of our resources has been hidden from me." The conversation represented the real work that would be required to rebuild our marriage on a foundation of complete transparency. The romantic notion that love could overcome any obstacle was being tested against the practical reality that partnership required honest information and shared decision-making. "What if we started over with complete transparency?" I suggested. "What if we treated this as an opportunity to build the partnership we always thought we had, but based on complete information this time?" Mike considered the proposal, and I could see him weighing the appeal of a fresh start against the complexity of processing years of hidden financial support. "I'd like that," he said finally. "But I'd also like to be involved in the foundation's work. I want to contribute something meaningful to the community impact you've been creating, something that draws on my skills and interests rather than just benefiting from your family's wealth." His request represented exactly the kind of authentic partnership I had hoped might emerge from complete honesty. Rather than simply accepting the benefits of my resources, Mike wanted to contribute his own talents and energy to work that mattered to both of us. "I'd love that," I replied. "The foundation has never had someone with your marketing and business development background involved in project evaluation and program design. Your perspective could significantly improve our effectiveness." As we rejoined the group for final goodbyes, I reflected on how completely the evening had transformed from Mike's simple birthday celebration into a catalyst for fundamental changes in multiple relationships and personal philosophies. Jessica's accusation, intended to expose me as a fraud, had instead exposed the emptiness of values based on appearance rather than substance. The drive home was quiet, both Mike and I processing the magnitude of what had occurred and what it meant for our future together. The modest neighborhoods of Riverside looked exactly the same as they had that morning, but our understanding of our place within the community had been fundamentally altered. "Are you worried about how this changes things?" Mike asked as we pulled into our driveway, looking at the house we had chosen based on what he thought we could afford together. "Change isn't necessarily bad," I replied. "We've been building something real together, something based on genuine compatibility and shared values. The money doesn't change those foundations. It just removes some artificial constraints we didn't know were artificial." Mike smiled for the first time since the revelations had begun. You know what? You're right. We chose this house because we loved it, not because we couldn't afford anything better. We chose this neighborhood because we wanted to be part of this community. Learning that we could have made different choices doesn't make our actual choices less meaningful. His perspective offered hope that our marriage could not only survive complete honesty, but actually benefit from it. The authenticity we had always valued in our relationship could finally be complete, encompassing every aspect of our shared life rather than being limited by my protective secrecy. 6 months later, the transformation that had begun with Jessica's accusation had rippled through our entire community in ways none of us could have predicted. The Riverside Heritage Foundation, no longer operating in anonymity, had become a model for community-driven philanthropy that attracted attention from nonprofit organizations throughout California. Mike had taken a leave of absence from his marketing job to work full-time on foundation projects, using his business development skills to create programs that generated sustainable impact rather than temporary relief. His contributions weren't financial, but they were essential, giving him ownership of our shared mission that was based on capability rather than capital. Jessica had transformed her social media presence from personal branding to community building, using her influence to highlight local businesses, promote volunteer opportunities, and showcase people whose work made their neighborhoods better. Her real estate career had evolved to focus on helping foundation grant recipients find appropriate commercial spaces and connecting new residents with community resources. The evening that had started with an accusation about marrying for money had become the catalyst for relationships built on authentic partnership, community service, and the recognition that true wealth is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you contribute to making the world better for others. As I stood in the elementary school classroom where I continued to teach third grade, watching my students work on a writing project about community heroes, I reflected on how Jessica's attack had forced truths into the open that strengthened rather than destroyed the relationships that mattered most. Sometimes the greatest challenges become the greatest opportunities for growth, transformation, and the discovery of what truly matters in building a meaningful life. The woman who had been accused of marrying for money had indeed built her life around financial resources, but not in the way anyone had assumed. I had used inherited wealth to create security that allowed for authentic choices, to support community development that improved my neighbors' lives, and ultimately to build partnerships based on shared values rather than financial dependence or social positioning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.